The Silence of Solomon, a 3,000-year-old secret. What if I told you that the most important construction project in human history, the building of God's first home on earth, was fundamentally different from every other building ever made? What if the true secret of Solomon's temple wasn't in the gold, the cedar, or the sheer scale, but in the silence? We've all heard the Sunday school stories. King Solomon, the wisest man, builds a magnificent sanctuary, a triumph of faith and engineering. But the official story, the one written in the scrolls, is missing a crucial, chilling detail. A detail so disturbing that the ancient rabbis chose to leave it unsaid. Because what you are about to hear is not an ordinary construction story. It is a secret buried for 3,000 years beneath the dust of Jerusalem. A truth so profound it changes everything about the holiest place that ever touched the earth. The Silence of Solomon. Part 2. The Cost of Perfection Part 2. The Cost of Perfection pick. We left off standing on the threshold of an incredible truth. Solomon's temple was built under an impossible ordinance. Absolute silence. No hammer, no axe. This rule immediately elevates the project beyond mere construction and into the realm of the sacred, the supernatural. The sheer logistics of the silent build are astounding. King Solomon had mobilized a workforce of 183,300 men, 30,000 laborers, 70,000 porters, and 80,000 stone cutters. This was an army, but an army of meticulous obedience, working not in unison, but in chilling quiet. The construction began on Mount Moriah, the very ground sanctified by Abraham's near sacrifice of Isaac, a place where heaven had already touched earth. Something ancient, something powerful, was stirring beneath the foundation. 1. The secret of the silent stone, obedience without error. Image prompt 2. The silent stone. The first challenge belonged to the stone cutters. Their leader was Adoniram, a man whose silence was as imposing as a scarred face. His command was simple, yet terrifying. Each stone must be prepared completely finished in the quarry before reaching the mount. There will be no margin for error. If a stone does not fit, you discard it and start over. Imagine the pressure. No adjustments. No second chances. Perfection demanded in the dust and darkness. The first attempts with iron tools proved disastrous. When a worker raised his hammer, the sound was not a clang, but a deep, unnatural scream. The stone rejected the iron, cracking in impossible, non-linear directions, as if refusing to be shaped by common tools of war or industry. Adoniram understood instantly. Iron was a material of the world, of conflict, of noise. The temple demanded the opposite. "Leave the hammers," he commanded. "You will use only bronze chisels, and you will work in silence." Absolute silence. Not a word. And so, the quietest, most intense labor in history began. Day after day, these massive men, accustomed to shouting and singing, worked in the gloom. Their only sound the soft, rhythmic scraping of bronze against limestone. But the silence had an unexpected, psychological effect. Cut off from normal human communication, their minds began to wander into deeper spaces. They started to see things, not with their eyes, but with a visceral, internal vision. Flashes of creatures with indescribable faces, intense light surrounding a celestial throne, and angels with wings of fire. When they left the quarry, they tried to speak of these visions, but the words would not form. It was as if something was guarding the experience, keeping the secrets of the stone locked inside their souls. The silence of the build had become a silence of the spirit. Benaiah, one of the young cutters, watched as the perfectly carved blocks were lifted and placed on Mount Moriah. They fit without the slightest scrape, without a sound, perfectly interlocking. "It is as if the stones know where to go," he whispered. "Don't speak of that." His companion trembled. "Some say we are not the ones guiding them. Others are working here, invisible others." The obedience of perfection had opened a door, making the builders unwitting participants in a project far grander and far more unsettling than they could imagine. The heartbeat of a cedar, a conscious sacrifice. The requirement for absolute perfection extended to the wood. In the mountains of Lebanon, King Hiram's finest woodcutters were tasked with selecting only the most flawless cedar, trees that had no knots, no imperfections, and met an exact, invisible standard. It was as if Solomon possessed a blueprint of the forest itself, knowing which specific trees were chosen by destiny. The leader of the Phoenician woodcutters was Zebud. He was a pagan, accustomed to his own rites, but even he felt the difference. The first tree designated for the temple was a giant, over 300 years old. When Zebud placed his callous hand on the bark, he recoiled. The tree felt alive, but not merely biologically. It felt conscious, as if its entire existence had been a long, silent vigil leading to this moment. "I cannot cut it," he murmured to his men. "There is something in it that should not be touched." Finally, duty and the promise of Solomon's immense payment forced his hand. He took his axe, also bronze, reflecting the king's unusual restriction on iron tools. Just as he prepared to strike, he heard it, a profound mental whisper that bypassed his physical ears. It was a voice that was not a voice, a message that was not words, yet utterly clear. "At last, I have waited so long. Cut me, free me, take me to the place for which I was created." The tree was not resisting. It was volunteering. It had a purpose written into its very rings. Zebud struck, and in the deep bite of the bronze blade he felt not the resistance of wood, but a profound sense of release, as if the mighty cedar had held its breath for 3 centuries and could finally exhale. When the massive tree finally fell, it did so with a roar that shook the entire mountain. And immediately, thousands of birds nesting in the surrounding trees took flight at once, darkening the sky, a colossal, feathery escort for the cedar's journey. During the slow, grueling transport to the coast, the men accompanying the timber swore they could feel an unnatural warmth radiating from the wood. It was not heat from the sun. It was subtle, persistent, and unsettling, the heat of an energy that defied physical explanation. The wood was not merely material. It was still, in some way, alive. 3. The gold that challenged reality. Image prompt 4. The gold that shone. The impossible demands only intensified when the time came to work with gold. Solomon amassed an astonishing 222 metric tons of gold, some of it from the edges of the known world. But among it was the temple gold, metal that defied all natural laws. Hiram of Tyre, the master artisan chosen for this sacred task, was speechless. He examined the bar of the temple gold. "This purity should not exist naturally," he declared. "Natural gold always has impurities. This is purer than anything that has come out of a furnace. It is as if it were created this way, pure from the beginning." The king confirmed Hiram's unspoken fear. This was not ordinary metal. Hiram's first assignment was the most sacred, casting the 2 colossal cherubim for the Holy of Holies. These were not works of imagination. They were exact, 5-cubit-high replicas of the angels the angel of the Lord had shown King David in his visions. "I am not creating a sculpture," Hiram realized. "I am recreating a living being." When the gold was melted in the temple furnaces, the laws of physics shattered again. The gold did not liquefy gradually. It changed state instantaneously, solid one moment, perfect liquid the next. And when liquid, it shone, not by reflecting the fire, but by emitting its own light, a searing, golden glow that forced the assistants to cover their faces. As Hiram poured the incandescent liquid into the molds, he swore he heard it, a sound like colossal wings beating just beyond the threshold of human hearing, a majestic displacement of air reaching his ears like a terrifying whisper. The gold was reacting to something. The stone was communicating with something. The wood was surrendering to something. Every element of the temple build screamed the same truth. This structure was being prepared for, or perhaps by, the unseen world. The shadow of the veil, a prison on the mount. By the 7th year, the unsettling reality of the temple's true nature could no longer be ignored. The chief overseer, Adoniram, tried to maintain order, but he couldn't explain the creeping fear of his men or the reports of workers disappearing. Always at night, always near the temple's innermost core, vanishing over a journey of barely 500 paces, Adoniram decided to seek the truth himself. He ventured into the unlit temple after hours. The darkness was unervingly substantive, dense enough to consume the light of his torch. He reached the veil, the richly woven curtain separating the holy place from the terrifying, empty space reserved only for God. He felt an overwhelming urge to pass, to know what lay beyond, but just as his hand approached the cloth, he heard it, the voice of absolute silence, a profound warning that stopped him dead. As he retreated, he found the physical proof of the temple's haunting. Near the massive bronze columns, he saw footprints. They were too large, too deep, and strangely incomplete, as if something massive had walked there, but could not bear the full weight of its existence in this reality. Adoniram gathered his highest men, and they traded their secret fears. Footsteps from nowhere, walls breathing, gold reacting to an invisible touch. But the most disturbing truth came from the stone cutters. The men working in the deep foundations had discovered that the mount was hollow beneath the temple. There was a natural cavern system, and from the depths they heard the rise of ancient, non-human songs. This led to the horrifying testimony of Shimei, the overseer who dared to explore the crack in the foundation. Deep in the cave system, he and his men found a circular chamber containing an altar, not Hebrew, with strange symbols and dark stains that were not exactly liquid, but not dry either. They were frozen in time. And then the entity appeared, tall, elongated, radiating a furious desperation. Shimei, finding impossible courage, announced they were building the temple of the Lord. The figure tilted its glowing head, uttering the chilling revelation, "The temple? So the time has finally arrived." This entity claimed to be a guardian from the first temple, built before David, before the judges, before the flood. It was a witness to an ancient, forgotten history. The figure delivered the ultimate, terrifying explanation for the absolute perfection and the total silence. Solomon thinks he is building a house for God, but in reality, he is building a prison to contain what cannot be destroyed, but also cannot be released, to keep sealed what must remain sealed until the end of days. The sheer unnatural perfection, the silence, the gold, the wood, it was all necessary to create a vessel strong enough to contain the divine glory, yes, but also a cage sturdy enough to contain the primeval chaos lurking beneath Mount Moriah. The temple was an anchor, sealing a seam in reality itself. The grand finale, the weight of glory crown. Finally, in the 11th year of Solomon's reign, the silent work was done. 7.5 years of unimaginable precision. The day of the dedication arrived. Solomon had summoned all of Israel. The priests, robed in white linen, carried the Ark of the Covenant, the heart of God's presence, from the city of David up to the mount. As they placed in the Holy of Holies, under the wings of the golden cherubim, the very fabric of reality shifted. The sky changed, the air felt dense, as if the frequency of existence were altering. Solomon stood before the altar and began his prayer, a river of supplication, recognition, and humility. And then it came. Over the temple, a cloud began to form. It was not mere condensation. It was substantive, dark, and charged with profound energy. The glory of the Lord, the Shekinah. The cloud filled the holy place. The priests, overwhelmed, could not stand to minister. With the cloud came a sound, not heard by physical ears, but felt in the soul, a resonance that vibrated in the bone marrow, as if the universe itself were striking a fundamental chord. The hundreds of thousands of workers who had built the temple fell to their knees. The presence was not oppressive, but overwhelming, like trying to look directly into the sun. Benaiah, the stone cutter, understood all in that moment. "Now you understand," an older worker whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Why every stone had to be perfect. Why every measurement had to be exact. Why we worked in silence for 7.5 years. Because we were not just building a building. We were building a vessel, a container for something so vast that normally it could not be contained. And that vessel had to be perfect. Any imperfection, and everything would have collapsed under the weight of glory. The silence was broken, replaced by the crushing weight of the divine presence. Years later, the nightmare remained. Benaiah, walking past the shining temple with his children, realized the true cost. He was plagued by dreams, hearing voices calling his name from the Holy of Holies. He carried a burden, a scar that was not seen, but always there. He looked at the temple, now a central beacon of national life. He told his son that building it was an honor, but also a terror. The wise man Nathan had told him it was normal, that all who worked on the temple carried something of it with them. But normal scars heal with time. Benaiah confessed his wife, looking at the glowing structure. This one only gets deeper. The temple stood, a marvel of perfection and silence. But the builders knew the secret. The silence they endured was the proof of a presence too vast for sound, and the perfection was a necessary lock on a prison meant to contain not just the glory above, but the ancient, forgotten chaos sealed beneath. The containment was complete. But the question remains, how long could the silence hold? And what happens to the world when the prison finally breaks? Part 1. The impossible ordinance exploding head. There is a single, overlooked verse in 1 Kings, chapter 6. It's easy to skim past, but once you see it, you cannot unsee the sheer impossibility it demands. The verse is simple. The temple was built in absolute silence. No hammer, no axe, no iron tool was heard while it was being built. Think about that for a moment. How do you construct a colossal stone building, a magnificent edifice that took over 7 years to complete, without the unmistakable clamor of a single hammer blow? It defies every law of physics, every principle of labor, and every noise ordinance known to man. The truth is, Solomon's temple was not built with ordinary hands, nor under ordinary rules. The men who raised those stones worked under a sacred silence, each stone carved without sound, each pillar raised as if it knew exactly where it was destined to be placed. But there was a price for that impossible silence, and the builders paid it, some with their sweat, others with their terror, and some simply vanished without a trace before seeing the temple finished. Why does no historian mention the accidents? Why do the chronicles remain silent about the nights when the work stopped for no reason? Why did the workers never return to their homes with the same look in their eyes? This is the central mystery we are unlocking today. Solomon's temple was not merely a building. It was a portal. This is not the story they told you. It is the story the wise men concealed. And when we reach the end, you will understand why. Centuries later, the great temple veil was torn from top to bottom. Why the Holy of Holies was suddenly, terrifyingly, exposed. Why a temple like that was never built again. Because the true purpose of the temple was not made of stone. Now, take a final deep breath and listen to what the silence of 3,000 years will finally reveal. We must begin where the impossible began, with the trembling hands of the scribes who first copied the text. The original Hebrew in 1 Kings 6 verse 7 is unrelenting. The house was built of stones prepared at the quarry, so that neither hammer nor axe nor any iron tool was heard while it was being built. No sound, no hammer, a colossal building raised in absolute silence. This was not a common ordinance. It was a sign that what was being built did not belong entirely to the world of men. Part 2. The Cause of Perfection, then by Tryon Kai. Pick. Solomon commanded an army of workers, 30,000 laborers, 70,000 porters, and 80,000 stone cutters, 183,300 men in total. But only a few, the highest overseers, knew the horrifying truth of what they were really building. Construction began in the 481st year after the Exodus, on Mount Moriah, the exact spot where Abraham had almost sacrificed Isaac. Something ancient, something powerful, was awakening beneath that mount. The secret of the silent stone. The first to arrive were the stone cutters, massive men, experts in reading rock, who knew exactly where to strike, so a stone would split cleanly. But this time, they had to make the stone silent forever. The chief overseer, Adoniram, gathered the workers. He had a scar on his cheek and spoke with chilling finality. The stones you're going to carve are not common. The temple is not common, and you cannot be common man. Each stone must be prepared completely finished in the quarry before reaching the mount. When it arrives at the sacred place, no blow must sound, not a single one. A young stone cutter named Benaiah raised his hand, echoing the thought of everyone present. How will we ensure it fits if we cannot adjust it? The answer was absolute, because you will carve according to the exact plan. Each measurement, each angle, there will be no margin for error. If a stone does not fit, you will discard it and start over. You cannot make mistakes. This is not just construction. It is obedience. That night, Fear and a strange anticipation hung in the air. The first man to raise his hammer in the northern quarry, working on a hard white limestone, felt a chill. He struck. The sound resonated like a scream, deep and unnatural, as if the stone itself were complaining. He dropped the hammer. This stone does not want to be carved. Another man tried. The sound was even stranger, as if something inside the stone were awakening. Then it happened. A crack appeared, not following the line of the blow, but extending in impossible directions, as if the stone were rejecting human touch. Adoniram emerged from the shadows. "Leave the hammers," he ordered. "You will use only bronze chisels, and you will work in silence. Absolute silence. Not a word while you carve. Only hands and stone." And so began the quietest, most terrifying work in history. Day after day, the stone cutters worked in the depths without speaking, without singing, only the soft, rhythmic scraping of bronze against limestone. And while they worked, something strange began to happen. They began to see things, not with their eyes, but with something deeper, visions at the edge of their minds. Images of angels with wings of fire, of creatures with indescribable faces, of a throne surrounded by a light so bright it hurt. When the first finished stones were taken to Mount Moriah, they fit without the slightest sound, as if they had always been destined to be there. It is as if the stones know where to go. Benaiah murmured to a companion, "Do not speak of that." The other responded, trembling, "Some say we are not the ones building. They say there are others working with us, invisible others." 2. The heartbeat of the cedar. While the silent stones piled up, another work began in the mountains of Lebanon. King Hiram of Tyre sent his best wood cutters for the cedar. But here, too, the rules were unnatural. Only specific trees were to be cut. Those that met precise, invisible measurements would without a single knot. It was as if Solomon had an invisible map of the forest, knowing which tree had been planted by God to be part of the temple. Zabud, the leader of the woodcutters, a man who had cut over 1,000 trees, hesitated before the first cedar. It was a colossal tree, perhaps 300 years old. When Zabud placed his hand on the bark, he felt something he had never felt before. The tree was alive in a different way, conscious, as if it knew the moment had come. "I cannot cut it," he murmured. A younger man scoffed. "It is just an old tree. It has no soul." Zabud glared. "How do you know? Have you lived 300 years with your roots drinking from the deep water? Have you felt every storm, every drought, every dawn for longer than your people have existed?" Duty and gold finally won. Zabud took his axe, also bronze, not iron, another strange request. Just before striking, he heard it, a whisper, not with his ears but in his mind, a voice that was not a voice. The message was clear. "At last, I have waited so long. Cut me, free me, take me to the place for which I was created." Zabud struck. He swore he felt something, not pain but release, as if the tree, held captive for centuries, could finally exhale. When the cedar finally fell, it did so with a roar that shook the forest, and all the birds nesting nearby took flight simultaneously, thousands of them darkening the sky, as if they were escorting something. During the 2-week journey to the coast, the men transporting the logs swore they could feel heat emanating from the wood, not physical heat, something subtle, as if the wood were alive in a sense that defied explanation. 3. The gold that shone with its own light. In the 4th year of construction, the time came for gold. Solomon had gathered 6,000 talents, approximately 222 metric tons of pure gold. But not all the gold was equal. There was gold that no one knew where it came from. The goldsmiths called it the temple gold. It was brighter, purer, and heavier than it should be according to its volume. Hiram of Tyre, the master goldsmith, was meticulous. When he saw the gold, he was breathless. "It is not just the quantity," he responded to the supervisor. "It is the purity. This gold should not exist. Not naturally. It is purer than any gold that has come out of a furnace. It is as if it were created this way, pure from the beginning." The first task was to create the cherubim for the Holy of Holies, 2 colossal figures of solid gold. Solomon gave Hiram the design, but Hiram realized it was more than a design. It was a portrait. Who saw this? Hiram asked the king. Solomon's gaze was grave. My father, David, in his last days, he said the angel of the Lord showed him the complete design of the temple, every detail, even the cherubim that guard the Arkansas. And these are exactly as he saw them. Hiram felt a chill. Then I am not creating a sculpture. I am recreating a living being. When Hiram melted the gold, something impossible happened. It did not become liquid gradually. It changed instantaneously. One moment solid, the next perfect liquid. And when liquid, it shone. It did not just reflect the fire's light. It emitted its own light, a golden glow that illuminated the entire workshop with intensity that hurt the eyes. As the liquid gold flowed into the molds, Hiram swore he heard something, a sound like wings, not the beating of bird wings, but something larger, more majestic, as the colossal creatures were flying just outside his range of vision, and the air displacement reached his ears like a whisper. The prison on the mount. In the 7th year, things began to happen that no supervisor dared to report officially. Workers were disappearing. One here, another there, always at night, always near the innermost sections, always without leaving a trace. Adoniram, the chief overseer, began investigating himself. One night, he entered the silent temple, carrying only a torch. The shadows were denser than normal, as if the darkness itself were more substantial. He reached the veil, the woven linen that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. He knew he shouldn't pass, but he had to know. Just before touching the veil, he heard a sound, not the wind, but as if silence itself were speaking a warning. As he retreated, he saw something near the bronze columns. Footprints. They were not human. They were too large, too deep, and strangely incomplete. It was as if something massive had walked there, but only leaving partial impressions, as if it did not weigh completely in this world. Adoniram convened a secret meeting. There is something in the temple, he said bluntly, something that is not human. The others confessed their fears. The carpenters heard footsteps where there was no one. The goldsmith saw the gold react as if something were touching it from the other side. And the stone cutters, working in the deepest foundations, reported that the mount was hollow beneath, and that sometimes they heard songs rising from the depths, ancient, non-human songs. The stone cutters also told a secret story. During the excavation, one overseer, Shimei, had discovered a crack in the rock that opened into a large natural cavern below. He and 3 trusted men had descended. In a circular chamber deep beneath the temple site, they found it, an altar, but it was not a Hebrew altar. The symbols were unknown, and there were dark stains on the surface that, even after centuries, still seemed wet. Blood, frozen in time. Suddenly they all felt it. A presence, indisputably real, ancient and awakening. Blocking their exit was a figure, tall, with elongated limbs, eyes that glowed with their own light, and an expression that mixed fury and a deeper desperation. "Who are you? Why have you come?" the figure asked, its voice resonating strangely. Shimei, terrified, managed to say they were workers of the temple of the Lord. The figure tilted its head. The temple? So the time has finally arrived. The figure revealed that it was a survivor, a guardian of the first temple, built before Solomon, before David, before the flood, when worship was done in high places. "You do not know your own history." The figure laughed, a terrible, joyless sound. "The temple you are building now is barely the last echo of something much more ancient." It explained why this place was chosen. It is an anchor, a point where reality is stitched, where worlds that should not touch are forced to coexist. The terrible revelation was laid bare. Solomon thinks he is building a house for God, but in reality he is building a prison to contain what cannot be destroyed, but also cannot be released, to keep sealed what must remain sealed until the end of days. Part 3. The Weight of Glory. In the 11th year of Solomon's reign, the temple was finished. 7 years and 6 months of constant construction, 183,300 workers, and an unbroken silence. But the day of dedication would be different. On that day, the silence would be broken by something infinitely more powerful, the voice of God himself. The Ark of the Covenant was brought to the mount. The priests carried it into the Holy of Holies, placing it under the outstretched wings of the golden cherubim. And then something happened. The sky changed, not dramatically, but subtly, as if the very frequency of reality was altering. Inside, Solomon stood before the bronze altar and prayed. While he prayed, a cloud began to form over the temple. It was not a normal cloud. It was denser, darker, charged with profound presence. The glory of the Lord, the Shekinah, the visible weight of the divine presence. The cloud filled the holy place, forcing the priest to stop. With the cloud came a sound, not audible with physical ears, but a resonance that vibrated in the bones and the soul, as if the universe itself were producing a fundamental note. The workers who had built the temple fell to their knees. Many could not bear to stand under the weight of that presence. It was not oppressive. It was overwhelming, like trying to look directly at the sun. Benaiah, the stone cutter, felt tears running down his cheeks. He understood now. Now you understand, an old carpenter whispered. Why every stone had to be perfect. Why every measurement had to be exact. Why we worked in silence for 7.5 years. Because we were not just building a building. We were building a vessel, a container for something so vast that normally it could not be contained. And that vessel had to be perfect. Any imperfection, and everything would have collapsed under the weight of glory. Years later, Benaiah, walking past the shining temple with his children, realized a true legacy. He was plagued by nightmares, dreams where he walked the empty halls, hearing voices call his name from the Holy of Holies. His wife asked him to seek help. Nathan the wise says it is normal. Benaiah told her. He says all of us who worked on the temple carry something of it with us, like a scar that is not seen, but is always there. He looked out at the temple, now a beacon of glory and mystery. The temple stood, but the builders carried the secret. The silence they endured was not an absence of noise. It was a proof of a presence so enormous that it swallowed all other sounds. The silent creation of the temple was an act of both worship and defense, an impossible task to create a perfect vessel to contain the glory, and a necessary prison to contain the ancient darkness beneath. And that, my friend, is why a temple like that was never built again, because the risk of the containment failing was too great. But the question remains, did the silence hold? And what exactly was sealed away on Mount Moriah? This naturally connects to the next part, focusing on the ultimate fate of the ark, the veil, and the destruction of the temple, maintaining the narrative flow. He's Silence of Solomon. Part 3. The Eternal Scarred Dove. We have traced the impossible journey of the stone, the cedar, and the gold. We witnessed the terrifying requirement of silence, not just as a rule, but as a defense, a way to build a vessel perfect enough to contain the divine, and a prison strong enough to seal the chaos beneath. Now, we approach the moment of truth. After 7.5 years of unimaginable meticulous labor, where every measurement was exact and every whisper suppressed, the temple was finally finished. Part 3. The Weight of Glory Crown. The 11th year of Solomon's reign. The month of Bull. The day of the dedication. This was the day the silence was meant to be broken. Solomon summoned all Israel, the elders, the princes, the entire population from Dan to Beersheba, a multitude so vast the chroniclers simply stopped counting. The air was thick with anticipation. The most sacred act began, the procession of the Ark of the Covenant, the heart of God's presence on earth. The priests, dressed in white linen, carried it on their shoulders, ascending to Mount Moriah, while the people chanted the Psalms of Ascent. Benaiah, the stone cutter, now 32 years old, stood watching from the walls. 7.5 years of silent, nerve-wracking work had taken their toll. He had a wife, 3 children, and scars he could never explain. He looked at the temple, shining under the sun like a second sun made by human hands. "It is beautiful, isn't it?" whispered Nathan, the old carpenter, standing beside him. "It is beautiful," Benaiah responded, "but it is also frightening." "Everything sacred is frightening," Nathan said, with the quiet wisdom of age, "because the sacred is dangerous. Not like fire that burns, but like truth that transforms. and transformation always hurts. They watched in silence as the ark was carried inside. The priests placed it in the Holy of Holies, positioning it beneath the outstretched wings of the gigantic, self-illuminating golden cherubim. And then it happened. The sky changed. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic clap of thunder, but a subtle, fundamental shift, as if the very color of the air was adjusting, as if the frequency of reality was altering to accommodate the eternal. Did you feel it? Benaiah whispered, blinking. Nathan nodded slowly. The threshold has been crossed. The line between the eternal and the temporal. Everything is aligned now. Inside the temple, Solomon stood before the great bronze altar and raised his hands. He began to pray. His words flowed like a river, a torrent of worship, humility, and acknowledgement that no house made by human hands could truly contain the Almighty. Yet, he petitioned God to simply put his name there, and while he prayed, the manifestation began. At first, it was barely perceptible, a haze, a change in the refraction of light over the structure. But gradually, it became denser, darker, heavier, a cloud. This was no ordinary moisture. It was the glory of the Lord, the Shekinah, the visible, physical weight of the divine presence made manifest. The cloud began to fill the temple. The priests, prepared to enter and minister, stopped dead. They could not pass. The glory was too heavy. And with the cloud came the sound we spoke of. Not a sound heard with the ear, but a profound, resonant frequency that vibrated in the bones, in the marrow, in the very soul, as if the entire universe were sounding a fundamental note of existence. The hundreds of thousands of workers, who had spent years ensuring the integrity of the vessel, fell to their knees. They could not bear to stand under the sheer pressure of that presence. It was overwhelming, like staring directly into the core of creation. Benaiah felt tears streaming down his face, and he didn't know why. It was not sorrow, it was release. Now you understand. Nathan's voice, barely a murmur, finally broke through. Why every stone had to be perfect. Why every measurement had to be exact. Why we worked in silence for 7.5 years. He paused, letting the vibration of the Shekinah underscore his final words. Because we were not just building a building. We were building a vessel, a container for something so vast that normally it could not be contained. And that vessel had to be perfect. Any imperfection, and everything would have collapsed under the weight of glory. The silence was a seal. The eternal scar, the legacy of silence broken art. 5 years after the dedication, the temple stood as the triumphant center of the world. But for the men who built it, the work was never truly over. Benaiah walked through Jerusalem with his 3 children. The youngest looked up at the temple in awe, shining gold against the blue sky. Father, is it true you helped build it? It must have been incredible. Benaiah stopped. For a moment, he considered telling him the truth. The sounds he heard, the things he saw, the men who disappeared, the entity beneath the mount. But he looked at the innocence in his son's eyes and decided that burden was not for him. It was hard, he said simply, but it was also an honor. Not everyone can say they put their hands on the house of the Lord. Would you do it again? Benaiah laughed, but it was a bitter, broken sound. No, once was enough. That night, Benaiah couldn't sleep. He suffered from the nightmares, dreams where he walked the empty temple, hearing voices calling his name from the Holy of Holies, seeing shadows that shouldn't exist. His wife, Abigail, found him sitting in the courtyard, staring at the temple glowing in the distance. "The nightmares again?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Nathan says it's normal, that all of us who worked on the temple carry something of it with us, like a scar that is not seen, but is always there. Does that console you?" Benaiah looked at his wife. "Not really," he confessed, "because normal scars heal with time. This one only gets deeper." He was not alone. The thousands of workers were forever marked. Some became fanatically devout, drawn back to the temple, desperately trying to reconnect with the overwhelming holiness they had touched. Others fled Jerusalem entirely, unable to bear the intensity that now emanated from the mount. It reminded them of things they preferred to forget. The truth is, they had come into contact with the ultimate reality. The temple was finished, but the men themselves were not. They were changed in ways they could neither explain nor reverse. The discipline of the silence, the sheer impossible perfection required, had stripped away their common humanity, forcing them to become vessels, just like the stone and the gold. Conclusion: the final reckoning, old key. Image prompt 3, the final tear. So, what is the final verdict on the Silent Temple? It was an act of faith so radical it bordered on magic. It was a construction project that required the full cooperation of the physical and the unseen. The silence was not a ritual to honor God. It was a necessary safety protocol to contain him. It was a lock on the door. The temple stood a marvel of perfection. For over 4 centuries, it held the glory. It kept the secrets. It maintained the anchor on Mount Moriah, keeping the ancient darkness sealed beneath the foundations. But no human-made container can hold the infinite forever. We now understand the chilling power behind the temple's construction. The ultimate containment was complete, and this is the final, terrifying paradox. The silence they endured was the proof of a presence too vast for sound. The perfection was the necessary lock on a prison. When that lock was finally and dramatically broken, not centuries later by the Babylonian siege, but with sudden, supernatural tear of the great veil, it signified the end of the physical containment. The barrier between the temporal and the eternal had been destroyed. This is why a temple like that was never built again. The price was too high. The risk of the containment failing was too great. The men who built it knew that the true tragedy wouldn't be the destruction of the stone and the gold. It would be the sudden realization that the silence had been broken, the prison was empty, and whatever was sealed away on Mount Moriah was finally released back into the world. Voiceover, fading and reflective. Think about the price of perfection. Think about the power of silence. And next time you read that ancient verse, remember the men who built a perfect cage, only to realize they were building a perfect gateway. Image prompt 4, the unsealed crack.